Hey everyone. In today's episode, I got a chance to talk with Nicole Fuselier, the VP of Corporate and Revenue Marketing over at Dremio. Nicole describes herself first and foremost as a revenue marketer, which I personally identify with. And then during that discussion, we really got into the weeds on talking about like demand generation and sales marketing alignment and overall what it means to be a full funnel marketer. I really enjoyed this conversation. So let's get into it. So, Nicole, it's great having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this will be fun. So, I was taking a look just as I was talking with Elise, I don't know, earlier last week before the holiday, and we were talking a little bit about, your background. And I was like, this is like the perfect guest that we're going to have on the show because I think we're going to get to nerd out a little bit on demand. So let's do this for the audience who's listening along with us. Maybe you could just tell them a little bit about yourself and Dremio and what you guys do.
Sure. So I am the VP of Corporate and Revenue Marketing at Dremio. I'm responsible for how we hit our targets from a marketing perspective and really working closely with the sales organization as well as the product organization because we obviously have pipeline targets, but we also have SaaS and cloud targets as well that we have to hit, right? And so how
Right.
does all come together? Dremio is about your data and how you can work with our cloud providers and use our data, but being a way to actually use the data in a fast, efficient way. So that way you don't have to copy your data. You can find a way to use your data in a way that is the most effective way for data engineers to be able to make decisions and make better business decisions much faster.
So that's interesting. So, all right, I always have this question for anybody who's coming in with a title like yours. How did you come up? So, did you come up from the marketing side? Did you come up from the sales side? Did you come up with, through some other path? Just curious how people should think
Yeah.
about
So
your
my
background.
background really started more on the customer side. So I was at Cisco for 13 years. And while I was there, I really focused more on customer. I led the Cisco advisory boards for a number of years. And I really actually love that my background started with customers because I think it stays with you all the way through. And I think in the end, when you're talking about
Yeah.
demand, you're trying to create new customers, right?
Right.
So while I was working on the customer side, and when I left Cisco, one of the things I really wanted to understand was the entire journey, right? So then moving over from the customer side, I got really interested in operations. Because everywhere I went and I was working on the customer stuff, I could see we were having challenges with our data and we were having challenges with processes, right? And how marketing and sales were working together as it related to Salesforce.com and how you're tracking things, right? And so that really got me interested in the operations side, and I didn't realize how good I was going to be at it and how much I really liked it. And I stayed in the operations side for quite a bit. But then as I was working on the operations side, it kind of naturally started leading towards the demand side because then you're thinking about targets and goals and where you want to get to. And so I would spend a lot of time working with the CMOs and leadership teams around how do you do your go to market targeting. So then it led to, well, how do you actually hit those targets? And that
Yeah.
started working on the demand and more the performance marketing side. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like the path that I took. I think in the very beginning, I was a little bit all over the place. I worked at different types of companies and different types of things. But I'll always be grateful to Cisco because it gave me my foundation, right?
Yeah.
But my foundation started with customers and then
Yeah.
worked its way up.
So there are so many things to unpack in what you just said. I'm trying to like make it clear on the next question. Because I could go in 15 different directions. But I'm going to start with this. First of all, you're totally speaking my language, right? And if you've listened to any of these episodes in the past, one of the things that we really talk about is how important it is to have a holistic view of what's happening across your funnel and specifically marketing all the way through to sales. Uh, and understanding what's going on in your CRM as a marketer to determine
Mhm.
what's working and what's not working so that you can really start driving towards pipeline creation and not necessarily something else that maybe is more sort of vanity metric, related. And also the other thing that I just sort of took away from that is you came from a customer centric sort of background and as you said you sort of carried that along with you. I also think that that makes you more perhaps empathetic to sales, in terms
Mhm.
of what their plight is and what they're really up against when they have to hit that quota. And then the same thing for marketing, where you're looking at like, how do you create more alignment around the metrics that really matter, that are going to help drive more of that pipeline that the sales team needs. And so thinking about things holistically is really the only way to have an intelligent conversation with somebody who is a non-marketing executive, i.e. the CFO. And so I'm just fascinated by people who have that sort of background and that sort of perspective. I'm just kind of curious, like, where is your sort of intersection point between marketing and sales? Like, what do you look at as your sort of your handoff um, for either pipeline created, or I don't know, SQL, SQO? Like, how do you define it within your organization?
How I think about it is a couple ways. I think old days marketing owned MQLs and sales owned pipeline. I don't look at that anyway that way anymore. Marketing has a pipeline number just like sales. We need to own pipeline and have same targets to them, right? And a few times I've reported to the CRO, and I love that because then I'm part of their target making. I'm part of their process versus a service, working with them, right?
Right.
So I personally like being within the same team, owning the same target. And I think
Yep.
that's why I like to call myself more of a revenue marketing person than just
Yep.
just an overall marketing person. I also think it's not just sales; it's also product, right?
Yep.
And so you have to really know that balance as well, because
Yeah.
if you're going to have cloud targets or SaaS targets, you have to understand that's also a PLG motion that how you have to lead as well.
Yeah.
In terms of how I look at it um, is agreeing on what those targets are going to be with sales, what percentages marketing is going to help support, but as well as, what is the actual outcomes that we're trying. So for my case, I also manage the BDR organization. So they all report to me as well. So what does that mean? That sales qualified meetings. And what are those sales qualified meetings? And how many meetings a month can we have that actually sets to pipeline, right? And what does that look like? And agreeing on that. But then also looking at the efficiencies around those meetings that are happening, not just from an MQL to a sales qualified meeting, but from a qualified meeting to actually pipeline. And sometimes it's content, sometimes it's other things that you have to change and learn, but it's those strong feedback loops across the different teams that really make a difference, right? So I love having the BDR organization part of the marketing organization. I've seen it both ways.
Yeah.
I don't really care which way it sits, as long as there's a tight alignment to, we're doing this. Here's the feedback I'm seeing. Here's the conversion that's happening.
Yeah.
Hey, this isn't working. Let's try X, Y, and Z. And as long as it's that spirit of we're in this together and we're working it through,
Yeah.
then that's fine. As long as
Yeah.
it's about that motion,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter where it sits, but it's about how does it align.
Well, so I love that, because I think it also makes it real clear where you're putting your investment dollars into human assisted, demo attends, or if it's something else that's more of a PQL, or, something else that might be a direct to an AE sort of inbound motion.
Yep,
So, and we, like, on our side, we have all three, which is always
we do
fun.
too.
Yeah,
We do
and
too.
so, because you can look at all of them and see how they're comparing against each other in terms of the efficiency of the dollars that you're putting in. How do you do that? So, like, when you were originally, like, let's say for 2022, you were going into 2022, you were making your budget. How much was sales produced versus marketing produced versus product produced for you guys?
So every company is a little bit different. A lot of companies right now 50-50. I know at other companies it can be 60-40. Product, we're just getting our cloud motion up and running. So it's still pretty smaller.
Same here, by
But
the way.
there's a lot of try that we can still do, right?
Mhm.
So it really depends on where you are on that scope. I can tell you when I was at Matterport, the last company, we were heavy on sales and then slowly trying to build the SaaS, and then it shifted. So
Yep.
some of it is, as you're doing your targeting process, really aligning on when is your go to market structure more sales driven versus PLG driven,
Yeah.
and knowing that time. There's a it's always hard though, because I think you're always going to have people who say, we got to go PLG, we got to go PLG, and you might not be ready for it yet.
Yeah.
So it's a really hard dynamic of really finding that right time, because you still have to hit your revenue numbers. You still have to hit those targets.
Yeah.
So if you lean one way, what does that mean and what trade-offs there are?
Yeah.
So I really believe on the go-to-market team, and how I look at the go-to-market team, it's marketing, it's product marketing, it's sales and finance, like all agreeing on, okay, here's where we're going and this is what the focus is, and
Yeah.
just kind of pushing that through.
So, how do you think about investment in an outbound motion versus an inbound motion? So obviously you're getting your PLG component is really ramped up, and I love what you said. Like everybody, by the way, marketers are super guilty of this. We're like, oh, that's the silver bullet, right? Let's go and that's that clearly that's why we're not hitting our number, right? That's the thing that we need to focus on. It's all, we put it on product. It's easy to do that. And it's absolutely wrong, and what we do, because where we end up getting ourselves into trouble is we sort of like are always holding out the hope that some PLG motion or something else is going to really sort of save the quarter or save the
Mhm.
year or whatever. And it is hard to do it well. It is hard to
Right.
do PLG well. And I think we underestimate the amount of work that it's going to take, and we overestimate the amount of benefit that we're going to get out of it out of the gate. And because it is a long-term thing where you have to have PLG mindset. So like, was that something that you helped implement when you came in, or was that something that was already sort of in process when you came into your role?
It was in process. It was definitely in process, before I got there, and something that's, important in terms of, like, we just had our last subsurface, we announced, like, the cloud and, like, it's already had beta and people were already using it, but now, it was fully there for people to really try the Forever Free and really try,
Yeah.
Dremio and see the benefit firsthand.
Yeah.
But that motion had, started before I got there.
So I'm curious, like, what are the things, like, for anybody who's listening and considering, getting something like a PLG off the ground very early on? They're thinking about numbers, they're thinking about the incremental improvement. Um, but also, like, it's to your point, right? It's easy to sort of miss on the amount of things that you have to check off the list before you can get something going. What are the three or four, maybe three things that you would point to that you really got to get buttoned up before you launch something like this?
To me, the first thing you have to understand is, what is the unique thing that you're offering from this PLG motion? And whether, if it's free, then the whole thing needs to be free, right? And then you need to be able to get them to seeing that value within free, right? And some people have it where you do it for you do it for 3 months. Some people have it, you have it for 30 days. Some people like it forever. Whatever that is, it has to actually be free, right? So they can actually experience and explore it. And it needs to be quick. They need to
Yeah.
get that value quickly.
Yeah.
So, when rolling something out, it's really nailing down, how are you going to get to that wow? How is it going to be quick and easy for them? And how is it going to be free,
Yeah.
right? If that's what your goal is, right? If you're doing a PLG where you're saying it's going to be like $10, whatever, sign up, okay, whatever, it's a little bit different. But I'm just saying, really focus on what that value is and how you're going to get them wow quickly. I also think the second step then is, okay, what's the process to get them there? But not just doing it from, signing them up and all the way through. I think a lot of people lean heavy on the marketing side around bringing people in.
Yeah.
But I think even more importantly than bringing them in is, how are you getting to actually activate and them actually getting to that wow?
Yeah.
And you have to actually be able to measure what's actually activating and what's getting them into the wow, and then what's actually the people and the types of users who are doing that, to then push your sign up information, right? And I think what happens is sometimes people are like, oh, I want to get thousands and thousands and thousands of signups. I strongly believe that, I mean, I could pay for signups. I could go do something and just get, a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that they're going to actually be active, and it doesn't mean that they're the right people.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit like when you announce something, you're going to see a spike of numbers because everyone's so excited about it. But of course it's going to drop afterwards, because
Yeah.
what's that noise that's kind of maintaining that? So
Yeah.
then the next thing you need to really do is prove that wow. You have to prove it, right? And until you actually can prove it, do you really want to be pushing this something that's out there that you actually can't prove yet.
Right.
So getting that proof in and getting a few of those people who have used it to talk about the wow for
Yeah.
you, it's at that point you're at a place to then take it to that next level. And I think there's a lot of dynamics around that. I think people on the product and the engineering side will like, I need more here, I need more here. And I'm like, I can, but let's be careful about how much we put in here because once you bring them in, if they have a bad experience, they're not going to come back.
Right.
So
Right.
let's think about that ratio, right? And
Yep.
what that means. I don't want to just bring so many in. So it's about figuring out that balance around where you want to go.
Um, I think one of the things that we tend to, I think we're starting to learn this as B2B marketers, right? But MQLs aren't everything. You sort of alluded to that earlier in the conversation. And I think the same thing, we can fall into that same trap for PQLs where
Why not? Yeah.
quality sort of gives way to quantity. And that's a dangerous slippery slope, right? And because we start measuring the wrong things. And I think the time to activation, just like pipe, you know, what am I looking for? Sales
SQM is like how
velocity.
many meetings?
Well, I was
Right.
thinking about sales velocity, right? Where, these
Mhm.
things are moving through really quickly. They're high quality, high intent opportunities that are flowing through really quickly. The same thing sort of happens in product as well, right? Where you've tapped into whatever this person is, you've gotten to that point where they've gotten quick value, and that they're doing the things that they need to do to be able to get sort of those hooks inside the product. And I think at the end of the day, those things are as well really more important than just getting the quantity in. And you think about the traditional MQL waterfall, and you sort of have the same sort of thing that happens
Mhm.
inside the product. So I guess that is really sort of the next question that I would have is, okay, so you've developed this thing, like what does your dashboard look like from a revenue perspective, like for your PQL motion? Like what are the things that you're paying attention to, that you report on in terms of the
I
health
would look
of
it over.
the product?
Yeah, well, I think, on a PQL side, I don't consider something a PQL until they actually have been using and consuming something long enough,
Mhm.
right? So to me, your sign up process or your kind of trial process or your free process,
Mhm.
that's about it's I would equate that to people coming in, how much traffic have you gotten? And how much of that traffic, how much of those people have gone to, let's say you're getting started or your try for free page, right? And how many of those people actually convert,
Yep.
right, to actually active folks and then using the product, consuming the product,
Yep.
and then moving to a PQL. Because in my mind, a PQL is at consumption and
Yep.
they've hit a certain amount or they've gotten to that wow.
Yep.
Now, what does that mean? What are some of the other services or unique things that we can provide outside of this experience that we need
Yeah.
to go to? So I think for some, you actually have to define where the PQL stage is and
Mhm.
what does that mean? Because
Yep.
every company is going to have PQL at a different point of
Yeah.
that flywheel, and we need to agree on
Yeah.
what is PQL.
Same thing for MQL, right? There's I think there's a lot of similarities between the two. And I think what's interesting to me that you just said is you said the consumption of the product is how you define it, and that you seem to mention both time and also activity based. Is that an
Mhm.
accurate statement?
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
look at not only are they doing the right things, but they're doing the right things for long enough.
Right.
Cool.
Right.
Okay. So that's interesting. And then like when you're looking at the dash and the instrumentation for this after the PQL, is there anything that's like what's between that stage and the next stage, like product activation? Like how do you think about that?
I look at that similar almost to an SQM, which is
Yeah.
okay, now we're going to reach out to that person,
Yeah.
right? And whether you have the BDR, whether you have the AE, it's dependent on the customer itself, and the usage of that customer. And based on their usage, it's now a perfect time for a meeting, right? To have a meeting and say, here's how you're currently using the product. Did you know you can do these types of things? Or these are the problems that I'm assuming that you're trying to solve. Here's some
Yeah.
other things and other ways that we can do it. So it's at that point where I think sales comes back involved, right? Sales
Yeah.
now becomes, and that's kind of why I love talking about from a revenue marketing. They're two different funnels, but they all lead to a same path of where you're trying to go,
Yeah.
right? And and in some cases it might make sense to do the pipeline funnel. In other cases, it could just be around, usage, adoption, bringing them in, and then going after them that way.
So what
So
do
it's
you do to
when the sales come in and what's the right role.
yeah, so I think the thing to me is going to be going back to that measurement of the KPI of like time to value, right?
Mhm.
When I'm looking at for me, for example, like when I'm looking at it, one of the things that I got a ton of insight into was just listening to onboarding calls because in our traditional
Mhm.
sales motion, right? And so we were listening to, the calls, like what were the issues that people were running into as they were getting up and running and onboarded. And I don't know if it's like this for you, but for us, like we had about 6 or 8 different use cases, right? That we felt like most, maybe 80% of our customers typically fell into in terms of getting time to like what was the outcome the desired outcome they were looking for, and then time to value like was fairly well compressed, right? And so when we looked at it,
Mhm.
it actually ended up being 6. I was just kind of curious, like for you, is that sort of the same methodology that you faced? Because when you start with a blank slate and you don't have anything like Pendo in-app guidance or whatever, right? You got to basically, it's all human assisted at that point, and
Mhm.
you do it as inefficiently as possible, but you learn a ton as long as you're asking the right
Right.
questions. So I was just kind of curious, like how did you do it?
I think in my past, the best way to do it is, like you said, is include people and learn from the onboarding and learn from how people are activating and spend time with them and be open to just listening, like, and listening and learning. I also think um, sometimes when you first launch it, what you think might be the most important value, you might learn something different through that
Yeah.
process. And something about that is important too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you go out with something and you think X, Y, and Z, but then through multiple onboardings, you're recognizing, hey, if I made some of these changes, that's going to be a quick lift. And
Yeah.
it's going to be more valuable for them than what you might have even thought of.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think part of the PLG motion is also just about market learning and really
Yeah.
learning your audience. And
Yeah.
there's there's things that you can only learn by getting in there with them.
Yeah. So we were really, I think, just thinking back, like how good of an opportunity it was
Mhm.
for us when we started rolling this out. It just so happened, and like I totally recognize this is like 1 in a million, but would just so happen that the person who was leading the product effort for our PLG used to run onboarding for 2 years. And so he we were in this conversation where we were talking about like all the things that we were learning. He's like, I used to run onboarding for a couple of years. I'm pretty familiar with how this works. And of course I felt stupid, afterwards. But at the same time, I thought, man, this is such a great way to be able to bake in all of the things that he knows, right, into the
Right.
product, and making that experience as close to approximating a live person as humanly possible. And never going to be 100%, of course, but it just gets you so far so fast, which was
Mhm.
always something I was super excited about. So
That's
um,
cool.
so so how do you let's think about just really quickly, just rewind for a second. How do you track and measure all of this? So obviously you have essentially 3 different motions, right? You've got your outbound BDR to AE, you've got your inbound, what I would imagine is probably, a demo request to an AE routed directly. And then you have sort of this middle, PQL uh, uh, function. So where does all of this flow into? What do you use? How do you keep it all separate? How do you report on it? Like, like how does all of that work?
I look at it as targets, right? I that's how my brain kind of works is okay, I've got targets. And I actually feel like I have a fourth. I have a direct to AE motion because there's things that we do that are supporting AEs directly that won't go through a BDR, right?
Mhm. Yep.
I've got an outbound BDR motion, and that focuses the outbound BDR team focusing on helping AEs on their target accounts
Yep.
and how they go after those target accounts. Right? I have an inbound BDR team that all they do is focus on inbound things that come to them,
Okay.
which are a lot of different things, right?
Yep. Yep.
So there's that, and then like you just talked about, there's the sign up process, right, or the
Yep.
PLG motion. So I look at everything has a target, right? And by doing it that way, um, then I'm looking at from a historical perspective what has actually happened, right? So
Yep.
I look at what actually has happened in the past and what let's say what programs and plans and channels have actually made those things happen, and that helped me identify a target around how I'm going to hit for across those motions. It
Mhm.
also goes back to working with the CRO and finance on let's agree what those targets are,
Yeah.
right? And then I look at my spend across things, and I look at, okay, based on my spend, here's where I think I can put these programs in place to hit these targets. And
Yeah.
I start tracking things by channel for
Yeah.
each one of these motions.
Yeah.
Right. And so each one of my channels, whether it's a media channel, whether it's an event channel, whether it's a webinar channel, they're looked at from a performance perspective. My brain leads to how does everything map to something that has some type of action and some type of outcome that we're trying to get to, right? And that's not to say that there aren't pure awareness things. Even though I'm a revenue and a a pure focusing on growth perspective, there are times when awareness and education is really important. So, for example, when you're talking about events, it's agreeing ahead of time of, okay, 70% of our events are going to have a pipeline and a cloud target, but this percentage of our events won't. This percentage of our events is about X, Y, and Z. I feel it's fine to do that, but get ahead of it. What I
Yeah.
hate is you're in Q2 and you're like, oh, I want to do all of this. And you're like, okay, but if you do that, then
Right.
that means that we're going to be at 50-50 of awareness and pipeline
Yeah.
signups, targets, and you're now like, so it's like it's almost like you have to agree around where those things are, and so
Yeah.
everything to me has a target, and a focus, and we need to align on what that is. And
Yeah.
my mind thinks like that all the time. I jokingly say this to my folks. I consider myself more the business side of marketing than the brand or the
Yeah.
category creation type of marketing.
Yeah.
I consider myself very much more the business side of
Yeah.
how you put all those pieces together.
Yeah, that's the way I'm wired too, to be honest with you. I really respect brand marketers, content folks, anybody who can do that and on just wordsmith in ways that I will never be able to do. I can sort of be enough to be dangerous, but that's that's not usually a good thing. But I think understanding the business aspect of what's driving the business, the outcomes
Mhm.
that you're looking for, and then being able to communicate that is a really marketable skill. And so it's also just happens to be how I personally think, and I think it's probably because back in my past life, I used to own a company of my own, and I would think like the owner, right?
Yeah.
I would think about cash flow. I would think about all of the other things that go into the business that's not just specifically in my marketing silo, and I think that brings something to the table
Mhm.
that is really valuable, right? To be able to, kind of cross that, that divide, so to speak. So that
I
being
think it
the
helps
case,
marketing people. I think it helps marketing people a lot because I
it
think sometimes marketing at one point, marketing was a little bit fluffy, right, for
yes,
some folks, right? And so I think what you and I are talking about is,
yeah,
putting accountability in marketing,
yeah,
putting,
yeah,
respect back in
yeah,
marketing, right?
yeah. I yeah, validation, right?
Validation,
And
right.
so that somebody asked me that, right? And we were sort of talking through what is marketing like what's expected of marketing, and the best way I can describe it is, marketing's kind of like it's really two things, right? It's pipeline creation first and foremost, right? 100% pipeline creation, and then the second, and everything sort of leads into that. And the second is you got to know how to tell your story. You got to know, like, what is the brand story and how do you tell it well. And those are the two elements, and it's completely left and right brain. That's why it's such a hard job.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody on a podcast episode, I don't know, Thursday of last week, and they were specifically talking about how everybody feels like they can do marketing's job until they're actually in
Mhm.
it and they are actually responsible for the number, and for being able to tell the story. It's easy to say it until you're in it. And
Yeah,
but
absolutely true.
yeah, and so I mean, I totally get it. I It's funny, I don't necessarily claim to be an expert in somebody else's field, but somehow marketing seems to have this like low barrier of perceived entry in terms of, what you can get
Especially in
into.
the performance channel, especially
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
because a lot of people like, well, I do events on my own, or, oh, I
Right.
have a LinkedIn page. I get
Right.
this. Or
Right.
like, I think there's a lot of people who do think, and
Right.
and I'm glad that they do. I'm glad that
Well,
they think that way. But
yeah.
at the same point, they need to understand that there's professionals who
Yeah.
look at it a little bit differently,
Yeah.
right? I've got some people on
Yeah.
my team who are experts at this specific channel,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, let them
Well,
do that.
I also think, yeah, 100%. And I also think marketers tend to do it to themselves.
Yeah,
We sort of injure ourselves in that way, in the credibility arena, because we don't realize what executives actually want. And so we end up reporting on, vanity metrics, really like early on, like leading indicator type stuff that doesn't really actually tie
right.
very clearly, like a clear line of sight to pipeline. I also fault executives, by the way, where they're just as guilty, because they don't actually know what to ask in a lot of cases. It's like, oh, well, clearly we need to see this funnel. Well, yeah, but is that really what you want to see? Do you want to see traffic, when it's not necessarily like lining up to, a leading indicator like you're wanting to be able to see? And usually the answer is no, right? It there's a lack of understanding about what actually is like marketing is doing that's contributing to pipeline. It's super easy, straight line of sight for sales, right?
Yeah.
That's a no brainer, which is a pro and con, right? Obviously, different kind of pressure. But where I want to always sort of be centered is like, as a marketer, is, being responsible for my, let's say, half of the number, right? Where it's truly marketing sourced, and we are contributing to that number, and we are making sales' job easier. And they know, like the confidence level is like, well, okay, look, I know kind of like how I know where half my money, or sorry, where half my deals are going to come from, every single month in and month out. What I don't
Right.
know is necessarily my sales sourced, but I've got a whole lot more capacity now in my sales team to go and sales source if I know where half my number is already coming from. It just makes
Yep.
that sales leader's job so much easier. So, I just, yeah, I love that. How do you think about your Martech stack? How do you think of, like, where do you capture all of this stuff? How do you surface all of these insights? Like, what tools are you using these days?
Yeah, let me just go back to one thing you just last said though, because I love what you talked about with kind of the sales and the CRO and knowing where half the funnel will come from. I will tell you, there are plenty of times when a salesperson might come to me and they need some help on
Yeah.
something. And it's not about being, what's it called? It's not about giving marketing the credit of the source.
Right.
There are plenty of times that marketing needs to do things that have nothing to do with marketing getting credit for that. And
Yeah.
I think that's what's also really important for folks to know is that Not everything marketing does is so that they're making sure that it's showing is sourced. There's plenty of times that we're going to do things, and I want to do things for the sales organization, for any organization, that is just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, and I think there's a lot of times that that happens as well. And I think that's what makes you a trusted partner, is that
So
you're willing to do those things, even if it means marketing isn't going to get the attribution or the
yeah.
source credit for it, you know?
So what would an example of that be? Is that be like buyer enablement materials? Like what would you use as an example for something like that?
There's been times where I've had an AE who's come to me and said, "Hey, if I could get these types of tools, if I can give me this type of data, or you can give me these assets, I think I'm gonna be able to go pitch this X, Y, and Z over here."
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, okay. And if it's that easy for me to do, why
Yeah.
wouldn't I do it?
Yeah.
There's been times when they've come to me and said, "You know what? I really want to go do this program on my own. I don't have the funds to do it.
Yeah.
Would you let me test it out? And if we
Yeah.
tested it out, we can then consider bringing it in." Okay,
Yeah.
let's do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That,
It's those types of things,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. I love that. So get doing the right thing, right? And I think this it is easier to make that determination when you are looking at sort of like the overall objective, which is again revenue, right? Closing deals and revenue. And when you're thinking, I imagine that the way that you think is, everything's sort of opportunity cost, right? As I'm building out content for my inbound motion, or I'm trying to enable my outbound, BDR team with the right kind of materials, or, this particular rep who wants to go and test and experiment with something, like it, thinking about it like as it all rolls up, being able to prioritize and look and weigh opportunity cost. Yeah, I like that.
And I think honestly, even though you might have a 50-50 or a 60-40 number, when the companies are doing really well, that number doesn't matter, right? If the company is
100%.
doing really well, who
100%.
cares?
100%.
Right? Who cares what the
Yeah.
percentage was, right?
Yeah.
You really only start diving into it
Yeah.
when it's not going well. And
Yeah.
right, so that's something to keep in mind too. So
Yeah.
I like to focus on,
Yeah.
we've got to win and we've got to win together.
Yeah.
So what's going to help do that,
Yeah.
right?
No, I
So
agree with
then
that. Yeah.
so your question about the MarTech stuff, my opinion is people are very tool happy right now,
Mhm.
and that there's a lot of tools out there. I think in this environment that we're in right now,
Yeah.
we should be really thinking back to basics and what tools do we need and what are going to be providing the right value, right? And let's not talk about the tool and what the tool provides. Let's talk about what we're trying to accomplish
Right.
and what systems and tools do we need to accomplish that.
Right.
Honestly, right now we're going through an inspection of all of our tools and relooking at what we have and why. And in some
Yeah.
cases, we've got similar tools across things, and I'm like, why? Like, do
Yeah.
we need 4 versions of X?
Yeah.
Right? So just like instead of thinking it as tools, because think about this case, the tool company is selling you the tool that they provide and what they can all do, right? So
Mhm.
they're good at telling you you need X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. But you and your sales ops person need to agree on where you're going. And if
Mhm.
you agree on what you're going, then you can talk about which tools satisfy those needs around where you're trying to go. And, I can tell you every day I get a call from somebody, "Oh, have you thought about this tool and what it can do here? Have you thought about that?" They're all great.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't map to where you're trying to go,
Yeah.
don't buy a tool.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me is, there are the nice to haves, and then there are the must haves. And there are a
Right?
lot of
Yeah.
nice to have tools that fit in that bucket, right? A lot of them. The must haves are the ones that are helping you align all of your marketing and sales data and surfacing those insights so that in times like this what's working and what's not working holistically across the entire organization, not just in the marketing silo. And I think that's the thing that I would point to, is saying, look, it's got to be like, you got to see what's actually driving pipeline, like, and just as
Yeah.
much like what's driving like closed loss deals, like, and why, and being able to surface those, because right now budgets are being challenged, and everybody's taking a
Scrutinize.
second, a third, and a fourth look. And you have to, as a marketing leader or a revenue leader, you need to know what's driving and what the priority, sort of chain is, and what's the bottom 20% or whatever that needs to go. And you need to pretty much have a quick answer for that. Now, what I would
Yep.
also tell marketers, and this is just my 2 cents, but I would say that there is going to come a time in the next 90 to 120 days, let's say 90 days, by the time that the third quarter, board meeting comes back around, that you are going to have to also know what was working that you already cut that you might need to
I
cut back,
know.
right?
I'm laughing because you're totally right.
And so you got to know that, and you also have to have that quick response answer saying, "Oh, here's the data that
Right.
supports what I'm saying." Right? And so those are the kinds of things, like when I think about like must-haves versus nice to haves, those are the things that I think about.
I
Obviously,
also think it's important, and I laugh when I say this too, is of course they want you to cut back, but they want you to cut back, but they also need you to hit that number,
yeah.
right? So it's finding out the thing that you would cut back. But like for media, for example, media is a place where everybody first kind of cuts back.
Yep.
But at the same time, that's
Yep.
also one of the primary
Yep.
sources that are bringing in some inbound opportunities.
100%.
So it's like, if you pull back 100%, it's not really the right thing to do,
That's right.
and having the confidence
Yeah.
of knowing those things, that sometimes you have to think about the gain that you've
Yes.
made.
Yes.
In some cases,
Yeah.
paying more in
Yes.
a time like this is a
Yes.
good strategy. I'm not saying it is for everything,
Right.
but you have to think through it.
It tells you where to shift your budget. And theoretically, if you've been doing it long enough, you've got enough data, you can sort of tell for how long you can shift your budget before it really starts, making an impact. But I love the word you just said. If you don't have all of this data captured, and then all of the data that you've captured organized, and then all of the data that you've captured and organized surfacing insights, then you don't have the confidence that
Mhm.
you're talking about to be able to articulate what's going to be the impact and what's not. And so that's sort of what gets us in trouble, right? Is we start taking a little bit of a flyer on something, saying this is what I think, and instead of it being, because theoretically you've got the data for it. The question is like, is it organized, and are the insights being surfaced to the point where you can make decisions on them?
Right.
And we've done a lot of, we're getting ready to do another study. So we just got done with a study on sales and marketing alignment. And we're doing one now on exactly this topic. By the way, I
Mm.
promise you, I didn't set you up for this. It was totally, it's 100% right in the fact that there are things that where we're asking questions of marketing directors and VPs right now in a survey, and it's, let's call it 2 to 300 of them, and of that, like, we expect a certain amount of responses, and most of them I would imagine most of us are going, or most of them are going to come back and say roughly the same thing, which is, I don't have everything. Like, I'm capturing it, but it's in 17 different places. And like, it's always a pain in the butt for me to go and actually do something like a board meeting because it takes me 2 weeks and four people to actually get all of the data organized in a way where I can put it in some slides and sort of like surface insights out of it. But how much more valuable would that be if you actually were having that in a real time, like, decision based, on a rolling basis, rather than like once a quarter or once a month whenever you report up? It's got to be more than that these days. And to me, that's table stakes. But there are so many marketers today, and which is what I expect this survey to come back and tell me. But there are so many marketers today that just don't have that yet. And I would call that table stakes, or just sort of basic blocking and tackling.
I also think it's changed over the years around how you look at that and how you manage that. And I can tell you now, when I'm working with different agencies, even the agencies that support on some of this stuff look at it differently. Like
Mm.
right now, I'm really kind of pushing the agency to how I want to see it,
Yeah.
right? And everybody has like their candid, like here's our
Mhm.
canned way that we
Right.
respond to that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That doesn't work for me and how I look at my targets,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like, um, again, how I look at it is even for media perspective, it's what's my cost for MQL, what's my cost for SQL,
Yeah.
what's my cost for opportunity, and
Yeah.
trying to get that all kind of mapped out. But in the very beginning, you're right, you won't have it. You have
Yeah.
to build it in most
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah.
And I can tell you most companies aren't patient, they don't want you to build it, they want it there yesterday,
Yeah.
right? And it's not something that can happen in 24 hours, it
Yeah.
takes time to build it.
Or they try to buy a single tool that sort of claims to do all of that, but then you find out that you still end up having to normalize the
Yeah.
data and do some of the marketing ops and BI work anyway to get you where
Mhm.
you want to go, but now you're sort of tied to a specific tool. And I think, ultimately the thing that gives you as much flexibility as you need to be able to look at the way the data is structured and like layering on your own the way that your team looks at their KPIs is sort of like acting as a manifold on top of whatever your data collection method is
Yeah.
is the sort of the future proof way of doing it because it's inevitable that it's going by the time you get it all built out another report's going to be requested or some other way
Mhm.
of looking at something is going to come into play and it's going to change things around and cost you more dev time or engineering time.
Yep.
So
Yep,
so by the
absolutely.
way, this is a fascinating conversation. I know we sort of started a little bit later than we normally would, but I've got about 12 more questions, I swear, in my head right now that I want to ask you. Would it be okay if I just if I got you back on the show, maybe we spend another 40 minutes or something like that
Yeah,
and do that? Okay.
yeah, that sounds fun.
So so I will definitely do that. I'd love to be able to finish out this conversation. This will be fun. Maybe we'll call it like a part two or something. But
Sounds great. It's been
this
fun
was great.
chatting.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is a lot of fun. So, just for anybody who's listening, how would they get a hold of you if they have any questions or anything where they, are like, man, I wish I got a little bit more clarity or color commentary around this one topic. How would they do that?
LinkedIn would be the best way to reach out to me. Feel free to ping me just on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with folks and talk. And every once in a while, I'll even take a call and just talk with folks around stuff. I find this stuff interesting.
Yeah,
I'm one of those people who actually think about it at night while I'm in bed, going,
yeah,
I wonder about that.
yeah,
But it's just I find the conversation fun.
yeah.
What
That's
I
great.
call fun. Maybe not
Yeah.
everybody else thinks it's fun, but I call it fun.
Yeah, no, it's fun. And it is actually fun when like you understand like the why underneath the questions that's being
And the
asked
how.
and yeah and then it leads to the how and I think that is 100% right and that's what makes it fun where you're really understanding why it is that you're like what numbers are you looking for and like what are you driving towards and understanding the why underneath all of that. So Nicole,
Mhm.
like I said, this is a fun conversation. We're gonna have to do it again.
Sounds wonderful. And thanks. Sorry that I was late, but thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show.